Okay, so I am recording a whole bunch of videos because the week that Thor 4 comes out, I'm going to be on a cruise, and I'm not going to be here. So all these theories may prove to be wrong. I mean, they're my theories, right? I don't care if they're right or wrong. I just like making theories. And apparently you guys love when I make theories, if for no other reason to poke holes in them. But thank you, by the way. But yeah, so this video, we're just going to throw out this crazy ass theory that this whole thing with Gorr is basically the result of Thanos, right? Now, I do want to make a video later on that says this whole thing is actually the result of Hela, because I feel like that's actually a more credible theory than the whole thing with Thanos. But it is entirely possible this is the case, right? Because they could just kind of rework everything that goes on with Gorr. Now, I know a lot of people are kind of like, I don't know, and rightfully so, right? Thanos had his time. He had like the whole first 10 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It was all building up to Thanos. And I do agree there is something just a little thin about the idea of just everything goes back to Thanos. We all love that time period in the MCU. There's a lot of nostalgia with Iron Man 1 and 2 and not really Iron Man 3, but like there's a lot of nostalgia when it comes to like those older movies. So I understand a lot of folks may not necessarily like this, but I do think it's a cool idea to at the very least have callbacks, because what I don't want in the future of the MCU is for it to feel like everything's disconnected. So like the first 10 years have nothing to do with what's going on right now. Like, I would rather that not be the case. I don't think that Thanos needs to return as some overarching villain, but I do like the idea that the consequences of what he did had a huge effect on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, more than simply just what we've seen so far. So, referencing the comic books, for those of you guys who aren't familiar with Gorr the God Butcher, the idea behind Gorr is that he was basically a guy who lived on a desolate world along with his family, and they were part of a nomadic tribe that would just travel across the world just trying to live, quite literally just trying to survive, because the world was just an exceedingly harsh place, which really begs the question, how was that world even capable of supporting life in the first place? But that's beside the point. The whole point here is that Thor and his folks were just traveling from one place to the next. They were very much a religious group. They prayed to the gods, and the idea was that the gods would bless them with water, or if they arrived at some destination that was lush with resources and so on, it was because the gods blessed them with that and all that kind of stuff, right? So like good things happening was proof of God's existence, and bad things happening was proof of God's existence. Kind of hard to argue with that logic. But the thing about this is that Gorr actually doubted the existence of any gods. And this really came to a head when over the course of their journey, he basically lost his entire family due to the environment they were in, starvation or just natural disasters or whatever the case was. And he cursed the gods. And as a result of that, he was exiled from his tribe. He was literally booted out. Now, this was really him just being left to die until he stumbled across the bodies of two gods, one of which was Null, and the other one was just a golden god whose identity I don't think Marvel's ever revealed. But what he came to realize is that the gods do actually exist. And as a result of that, he came to realize the gods simply just weren't answering their prayers. The gods were just ignoring them. And that's what led to his hatred of the gods. And so he ends up taking the sword, which came to be known as the All Black or the All Black Necro Sword or the Necro Sword or any number of names that people call it, and went on a crusade across the universe, killing every god he could find. And I always talk about this every single time I talk about Gorr. The guy was amazing. He had this moment where he was basically interrogating Thor, and he told Thor that he tortured the god of torture to the point that the god of torture actually gave up his own family's location. It was nuts just how crazy Gorr was. I think we can all universally agree the only reason Gorr was so awesome in the comics was because he had head, tails, and didn't have a nose. And if he didn't have head, tails, or a nose in the comics, well, it would have just taken away from the significance of everything. The comic never would have been worth reading in the first place. That's how important the head, tails, and the nose were. In sarcasm. Stop complaining about stupid things. So here's the thing. When it came to Gorr, right, when it came to this whole thing, my idea is this. Take that origin of Gorr and then just wrap it up and throw it into everything going on with regards to Thanos, right? We know that like Thanos, over his time, before he got the Infinity Stones, he traveled across the universe and he had basically been wiping out half the population of entire worlds. When he got the Infinity Stones, then he realized he could just do it in one fell swoop. Like he could just snap his fingers and blink out half the life in the universe that way. Because as we know, Thanos is a firm believer in the philosophy, work smart, not hard. Now, having said that, is it that hard to believe that the actions of Thanos would result in any number of people on any number of those worlds, those survivors, during this whole great big huge conflict when this was happening, begging to their gods to save them? right? Like, save us, save us, save us, and basically being ignored the entire time. Only for the defeat of Thanos, right? That whole thing reaching the ears of everybody else, because I have to believe when Thor joined the Guardians of the Galaxy and then went out into the universe, that they kept it all to themselves. It's like one of those things, like the worst kept secret ever, right? Like, surely everybody knows. It's not that hard to believe that in that circumstance, Gorr would look at everything that unfolded and then realize people like Thor exist. And by his own, looking around or doing his own investigation, suddenly the Asgardians as a whole exist. And like Zeus and the Olympians exist. And all these gods that we've never seen before exist. Possibly even the gods of his own planet exist. And came to the realization the gods could have stepped in when Thanos was doing this, and they never did. And as a result of that, gods don't care about mortal people. Gods are just really, really crappy folk who are out there. And Gorr goes on a crusade to start killing gods, especially if instead of Gorr's family dying as a result of natural disasters or something like that, his family were half the people that were chosen to be cold. Half the people that were chosen by the forces of Thanos to be killed, and he was kept alive, because we saw that, right? That scene with Gamora, like when she was a little girl and like they were splitting up the world, like half the world's population in the most inefficient way ever. And like you had daughters like begging for their moms and families begging to stay together and all that kind of stuff. We saw that go down. So honestly, while it would kind of be like, really, we're referencing Thanos again? I think it's a cool idea, because it hits at this notion that the consequences of Thanos blinking out half the life in the universe or traveling around the universe and killing half the life on any individual world manually, that the consequences for doing that were much further reaching than like the collapse of an ecosystem or economies going belly up or something like that. It was a crisis of faith for a lot of different people. Not only that, but it makes Gorr relatable in the sense that the question that we've all had ever since the end of Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, specifically Endgame, and we saw the introduction of the Eternals and the Celestials. Now we know Zeus exists in Thor 4 and all these things that we're wondering. The question that we all have is, where were they? What were they doing when all of this was happening? What was Zeus and the Olympians doing when half the Earth's population was being wiped out of existence with a snap, or Thanos' forces invaded or something like that? Did they not know that this was Thanos' plan? Did they have no idea that was the case? Why did Thor never go and contact the Olympians and let them know what was going on and call them in for reinforcements? Why didn't the Eternals step in? Why didn't they get involved? They were told not to by the Celestials, but you would think that the Celestials roaming around believe or coming to the realization that a person with effectively nigh omnipotence with this jeweled glove blinking out half the life in the universe is a problem, because maybe it affects them, right? Like, where were all these different beings that existed out there? And if it's one of those things where the gods wouldn't be affected by half the universe's population blinking out of existence, maybe they just didn't care. Whatever the answer is that we're given, if it's done in the right way, it would feed into the nature of Gorr and our ability to look at that and say, yeah, man, Gorr's right. The gods just really don't care. Like, they really just didn't care. If at the end of the day, Thor's like, where were you guys during that whole thing? And the response to Zeus is, it didn't bother us. I'm immortal. I can't be destroyed, right? We cannot die in that traditional sense. We can't be blinked out of existence because we are forever. I'll just come right back. Like, quite literally, Thanos snapped his fingers, I turned to dust, and then walked out of that closet over there because it's impossible to kill me. Like, it's just one of those things, right? If that's the case, and it's kind of like, okay, cool. So like, that gives us our answer. And so it would make Gorr relatable in that way. I'm not saying it would be as goofy as that explanation, but I'm simply just saying this idea that the gods wouldn't be affected by it, therefore the gods simply don't care, would feed into our understanding of why it is that Gorr is doing what he's doing. So I don't know. Just let me know what you guys think, right? I really like this theory and I like this idea. Again, I get that it's going back and it's referencing Thanos. And again, I do agree with the idea that Thanos had his time, but I do think there's something to be said about saying these are the consequences of what happened. These are the consequences of Thanos blinking out half the life in the universe. The consequences are not just limited to what you saw during the events of Avengers Endgame. There are much bigger consequences beyond that, much bigger things that were affected by this on a huge scale and in a big way. So I'm curious. Right, I think it's just one of those really, really interesting ideas, a really interesting concept. I'm excited to see how they handle it in the movie. It could be that Gorr's entire basis is just far more basic than that. If it is, I feel like it's a missed opportunity. But thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.